Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here today on the first Evidence-Based Practice Network webinar of the year. I'm Deanna Parrish, and I am the Program Director of the Academic Alliance. I'm excited to say we're starting another year as one of the technical assistance providers from the Office of Special Education Services. So we're glad that they continue to support this work that we can do for you guys. I'm excited to introduce our presenters today. Got Dr. Susan Thomas and Ginger Cato, both who work with Academic Alliance to share resources for schools and districts. And I will turn it over to you ladies to get started.
Well, thanks. We are glad to be here today, and it's been fun preparing this as Ginger and I have worked together as a general educator and special educator. I have to say I feel so fortunate that we have Ginger that has this wealth of knowledge about the standards and how to really get things implemented in school districts. She's still working in a school district part-time, and so that helps us to have good knowledge as we're planning and thinking about how to support you. Today will not be about how to write a goal. It's more about thinking about how we work with the standards. So I'm glad to see a variety of people here. I see some people that want to support teachers. I see some of you are wanting to learn more for yourselves as a teacher. So it's great to have all of you with us today. Just a reminder about our mission and purpose, and that really is for us to research and disseminate evidence-based practices and to try to make things easy for you to find and use. There's so much out there, so we want to make things available to you. And we try to frame all of our work within the MTSS framework for schools. This is our team. You can see who we are. Dr. Yell is our senior advisor. Deanna's introduced herself. Jenny Saunders is our program coordinator, and she'll be joining in. And then Ginger and I do coaching to try to support districts. So we hope today that when you leave this session, we will answer some questions from you. And one of them is about what are the requirements in the law, because we do always have to remember, and those of you who know me know I'm all about programming, but we want to make sure that we're meeting those requirements in the law and that we all understand them. And how does the additional guidance help us in aligning the IEP to the standards? And then we're going to hopefully, what are the resources and tools that you can use to help you? And what do schools have to have in place for success to improve outcomes for students? Because we can put every evidence-based practice in place, but if we don't have those resources and supports, then it's really difficult for us. So I am going to try to get my screen here. Here is back one. There we go. If you will check here, these are our resources for today. This will take you to our Google Doc. We'll also be sending this out to you if you don't get it, so don't worry about that. And Ginger, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I know we are here in Kershaw County, have been in school this is our third week. So I hope you all have had a great start to the school year. And if you haven't started yet, I hope you're getting geared up and getting ready. And that starts by helping teachers so they'll be ready to help students. This is a great graphic that I do love. I love to think about these are our students, and here we are as teachers. And it point blank says, your pass or fail is going to depend on your ability to climb to the top. Are you ready? Okay. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at those animals right there. And if we're taking a standardized test and it needs to be climbing to the top of the tree, I'm not sure that all of those students are going to be successful. So why would that test be unfair? You know, who would do well on that test and who wouldn't? I mean, even saying that some of those students there, the monkey, the bird, the elephant, you know, they may be talented and skilled in other areas, but they can't climb to the top of that tree. So one of the purposes of the work today that we're going to talk about is seeing where students are with the standards and how we can scaffold their supports to help them get to where they need to be, and looking at the resources that the State Department has provided for us to do that, specifically looking today through the lens of ELA.
I'm trying to get it together there.
I know you're doing a great job. So this is a 10,000 foot view. And I feel like we've been looking at a lot of these cloud pictures lately with the hurricane out there, but this is not a hurricane. This is just a 10,000-foot view. And today we're just looking at providing a general understanding or an overview of the standards and how they relate to IEP development. So today we're going to look at providing you an overview as well as provide you with some tools that you might be able to go back and use in your classrooms with your teachers. So looking specifically at the standard instruction process, we have the college and career standards, career ready standards, and those are the expectations. They guide us to what students should know and what they should do at every grade level. The grade level expectations that at the beginning of every grade level for the standards basically tell us this is what a student should do by the end of that grade level. The indicators within the standards help to clarify the standards. Some of those indicators specifically have indicator insights that provide what to teach and really do provide that clarity. And these instructional objectives are not necessarily written in any required order. They're not sequential in that way, shape, or form, but they do provide you with some guidance so that will help you get your students better prepared and ready for taking the SC Ready assessment in the spring. And we know that that assessment is our measurement system to help us identify whether or not we've done a really good job of teaching our standards. So we're going to look today, and when it's my turn to talk after Susan speaks, I'm going to talk to you about some specific resources that I use on the daily here with teachers and administrators that I find that our State Department has provided a phenomenal job with, and it's really helped me with my teachers.
Well, I think we have a lot of great tools that we want to make sure we're utilizing so that we can really address the standards with our students. First of all, I'm so excited about the high quality instructional materials our state has provided. We have more now than ever, and it's so exciting to see that because I remember the days when we didn't have anything. And so it's good that we have those and we want to utilize those. If you're a special education teacher, you want to make sure you're looking at those. You may not be teaching that basal curriculum in an elementary school or that core that may be covered for the student in general ed, but you've got to use that as your guide to be deciding what to do. Our little secret, sauce is our specially designed instruction. And that's what makes special ed special, is that we take those high quality instructional materials and then we use specially designed instruction. And part of that process is that we are going to have annual goals that identify the skills that students need to work on. And then finally, we want to have a good, valid, and reliable assessment tool to monitor progress towards those goals. It's really important that we have those pieces in place. And I know when I work in school districts, I always say, if you don't have a good assessment tool, then we got to fix that first. And so if you're here in a school or a district and responsible for that, double check and make sure teachers have those tools they need. They got to have the scales to know if what they're doing is working. Now, I don't want to bore you, but, one thing I learned from our great Dr. Mitchell is we always want to root what we do in the law. But remember, the law helps us to get to good programming. And there is nothing that will replace good programming. You can have a legally compliant IEP, but if it's not an effectively meaningful IEP, we won't be moving students forward. So what does the law say? And I'm not going to read this to you. You can go back and look at it when we send it to you. But I like to talk about we have to have that specially designed instruction, which means we're going to adapt, as appropriate to meet the needs of the child. And the law actually defines specially designed instruction. We have to address their unique needs that are a result of their disability. And we have to ensure access to the child to the general curriculum so that they can meet the standards. They got to have access or there's no chance of them meeting the standards. So that's really important. And then, of course, I want to talk today's about goals. So what does the law say the IEP has to have? It says it has to have a statement of a measurable annual goal. Love Ed Plan now because they really help us write good, measurable goals. And we got to have not just academic goals, but also those functional goals. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But the purpose of that is so that we can meet the child's needs that result from their disability so that they can be involved in and make progress in the general curriculum. Also, so we can meet their other educational needs. And so that's what we've got to be doing. And all of you know that. I know everybody knows it, but I think we always need to go back to that is the charge in the law for what we're supposed to do. Well, you got to love it when the Office of Special Education Programs decides, well, let's give a little more guidance. So they provide these things called Dear Colleague letters. And you got to love a good Dear Colleague letter. And this one was issued in November of 2015. There's been a lot of just at that point of time a discussion about the standards and how we were helping students to meet the standards. I think the things we see in here are still really important. First of all, it's not just the goal has to align, but the IEP has to align. That's the advice that we are getting, is that the IEP, the entire program, must be aligned with the state's academic content standards. And I think we do a good job of thinking about that. But I want to talk a little bit about this letter because I find it interesting. Because the first thing they say is we expect annual goals to be aligned with state academic content standards for the grade level in which the child is enrolled. But then they say, however, this must guide but not replace in the individualized decision-making required by the IEP process. So I love when they write these things, and I'm all about the content standards, but we still have to remember we make every decision for students individually. I worked at the State Department years and years ago, and one of our ed associates used to say, if you use the word all and children with disabilities in the same sentence, you might want to check yourself before you go any further, because we do still have to make those individual decisions. They go on to kind of give us a little bit more help when we think about, okay, what about this? Well, we might have kids that are significantly below grade level. I'm not sure about you, but have you ever had somebody in the 6th grade that was maybe reading on a 2nd grade level? I had plenty of those when I was teaching. I am sure you do as well. And so what does that mean? The IEP team should estimate the growth towards the state's academic content standards. So how are we moving toward that? Because we're not going to just go from, the 2nd grade level to maybe the 6th grade level in 1 year. That would be like saying Susan's going to lose 40 pounds before Christmas. It's probably not going to happen. But what we have to show is that ambitious growth. And they go on to say this in this next part where they again say significantly below the level of the grade in which the child is enrolled. IEP teams should determine annual goals that are ambitious but achievable. And then they say the goals should be sufficiently ambitious to help close the gap. So everybody knows I don't like that term, close the gap. I would have preferred it if they had said narrow the gap, because for some kids, that gap may not ever completely close. I'm old and I've never been the ideal weight, but I've certainly been a healthier weight than I am right now. So we want to work to get to as close and narrow in an ambitious, expedited way. So here's what I think about. We have that IEP program alignment. We are focusing on growth and ambitious growth. And we have ambitious goals to do that. And if IEP teams really come together and think about that, and we're really pushing towards those ambitious goals to move kids forward, and we're not just setting a goal, but we're teaching and responding to instruction through progress monitoring, that would be a whole nother session that we would talk about. We are going to begin to narrow that gap and close it for students with disabilities. Seen it happen. I know it's true. So let's just take a look. I want to talk about this consistent message that we continue to get from court cases. And I will tell you, I've talked at length with Dr. Yell about this to make sure that I was kind of in line. And I've read a lot of things that he's written along with David Bateman and Jim Schreiner. But this is our message. The entire IEP must align with the standards. The goals should be written to meet the unique needs of the child and enable them to make progress in the general curriculum. And we must be able to demonstrate that students are making progress toward the grade level standards, narrowing the gap. That's the key there. As a former special ed director, that's what's important. It can't just be a little bit of progress. It's got to be ambitious progress. And so we have to set ambitious goals. And we're not talking about today how to set those ambitious goals, but we do have tools to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about the research on accelerated achievement of students with disabilities. And this is an article that's currently in press by Dr. Yell, Dr. Jim Schreiner, and David Bateman, Dr. David Bateman. And this comes from some other research. There's little evidence to support a fully standards-based instructional approach, accelerating the achievement of students with disabilities. And what that means to me is just saying, okay, we're putting them in the standards, they will come. There's not evidence to support that. So I want you to think about that, because if you're just sticking a child in a classroom because you say, oh, they're teaching the standards there, there's not a lot of evidence to support that alone. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying pull all these kids out. Don't overgeneralize. But there is evidence to support an individualized approach using data-based decisions to prioritize critical skills within the general curriculum and grade level standards that can accelerate learning. That's where the evidence is. We have to be judicious and prioritize what we're going to do so that we can accelerate students to have those skills. So I like to think about it this way, and I'm almost done, and I'm going to turn it over to Ginger because she's going to show you some groovy tools that you can use to think about how you plan instruction. But when we're planning for programming, we have to think about where students are performing. I love it that a lot of times, I don't know if y'all notice this, but we hear people say students with disabilities as if they're all the same. So do this for students with disabilities. So students with disabilities are not all the same. So as a former district person who addressed this need, believe it or not, this is not new, trying to move kids to meet the standards. It's been going on a long time. I think you have to think about how will you group students for instruction? And what is going to be your focus for those students? So this is a big, I call it the big bucket view. So we have a group of students who have prerequisite skills. They can meet the standards with some special education support. Those are generally students who are very close to grade level. Sometimes those are students that really academics is not their big problem. They have functional skills that are their problem, maybe organizational skills or behavioral concerns. And so those students, that's a group of students that we are writing goals for and we are planning instruction for. We have a group of students who may be 2 or 3 grade levels below in certain content areas. And so those students, we can really start talking about how can we prioritize to get those bang for the buck so that we can move those students and close that gap. And I will tell you that this is the group that, if I have any administrators in here, and I hate to say it, but we're all thinking about those accountability assessments. That's the group, if we're really strategic with these, that we can start moving our scores. And so that's one of the things, and kids are learning. That's the most important thing. And then we have students who are significantly below grade level. They can't meaningfully access. It's not just that they can't read, they have other issues, many. They don't have even grade level vocabulary. And so those are students we have to think about their program in a certain way. And then of course, we have students that are participating in that alternate assessment, which is not our focus today. So when we start thinking about planning programs and aligning our goals in our program to the standards, we're going to always start with supplementary aids and services and modifications first. Because if I'm a student and I can access and have meaningful benefit from the standards in that general classroom with accommodations, maybe supplementary services, maybe modifications, that's where we start. I have seen too many kids who have been placed in self-contained because they could not decode grade level text, but their vocabulary was okay. They had good listening comprehension skills, but they could not read alone. Those are kids that we would never want to see placed in a self-contained, more restrictive setting. Just seen it over the years, not as much. But I've also seen students who can't access anything in the classroom. And I have a friend that sometimes says they're in the gen ed classroom, but they're on the sideline because they don't even have the prerequisite skills to meaningfully benefit from instruction. And so we've got to think about those kids too. And then we're going to have goals that I call for support. Those are those access skills, organizational skills, behavior skills, study skills, all kinds of different skills that those kids need to be able to benefit and to be able to achieve the grade level standards. And then we have students that have goals for those targeted prerequisite skills. They can't read. They're reading on that second grade level and they're in the 7th grade. And so we still have to be teaching those students how to read. And that's an important thing, while also teaching them some of the grade level content. And depending on their skills and their present levels of performance is going to depend on how we provide instruction in those skills. I just want to give you a brief example. And this is an easy one. We told you this is the 10,000 foot view. It's not perfect. This is 45 minutes. We can't teach goal writing and all of that today. But if I have an 8th grade student reading on a 3rd grade level, okay, the student has some organizational and behavioral issues. I'm not going into what they are because that's not the purpose of this. But one thing I do know about this student is they have appropriate grade level vocabulary. That's why we got to check that. We got to check their language to make sure they have it. They also have strong listening comprehension. We have evidence to support that. The student can answer.
Let me see if I can pull up the presentation. I'm sorry, y'all. And I can do that. Let me get this real quick.
Susan did pop back in.
She did? Okay.
She did.
Thanks. You got to love technology, right? There she is.
It's actually me. I guess we both lost it at the same time, being in the same area.
Okay.
So you're good? Okay.
Yeah. Is she back in or not?
I do not see her.
Okay. So I don't want to speak to her slides, but I'm going to do the best I can. But she was talking about, and it's going to blend nicely.
I'm here, Ginger.
Okay, there you go.
I'm here. I just couldn't get it off mute. All right.
Sometimes people might want that, right?
Okay. So I don't know where this popped off. Ginger, can you give me a?
Yeah, you were back on talking about the present level, the 8th grade student who reads on the 3rd grade level.
Okay. All right. And we know the child has some organizational and behavioral issues, but we do know we have evidence to support that they have grade level vocabulary, they have good listening comprehension skills, and we know that if we present things orally, they are able to benefit from that. And so we've got some good information to help us know how to set up those goals. First of all, we're going to have those access skills, those goals for functional support, organization and behavior. And, we've got to write those because that's going to enable that child to be successful in the classroom. That's how they access. That's how this aligns and helps them to meet the standards. But at the same time, we've got to have prerequisite skills. And these are more reading foundation, even though the child's kind of reading in third grade, that's the make it, break it, right? We like to think in our standards of K2 as being foundation. Third is the icing on the cake to make sure they are fluent readers. And if you know the science of reading, you understand that level, how important it is for them. And so we're going to have a couple of goals for that student that are instructionally appropriate where they're reading. Now, remember, when we set general outcome measure goals, and I'm not going to get into that today, that's a whole nother session. Remember, our goal that we use is setting for where we want the kid to be at the end of the year. So this is a third grader. So if I've got a year's worth of progress, I'm going to want them to be in fourth grade, which presents some problems when writing goals if you're using some of the common fluency measures. And we might do another session on that. And then I'm going to use Maze because Maze helps determine their ability to navigate text at that grade level. And so that's kind of the way I'm going to think about aligning this to the standards. So that means somebody's got to work on that goal to teach that child how to read. And that's going to be the challenge. Because some of those goals we can embed, those functional organizational support goals, those are things that are easy kind of to cover and embed with this child in the general curriculum. It's really hard to teach way low grade levels below for a student in the general classroom. It's hard enough just to cover all the standards. Would you not agree, Ginger?
100%.
So when we got to think about that. So I just want to this is a tool to help with writing goals. We have connected with this, a great document from the National Center for Intensive Intervention. It's in our one pager that talks about how to write academic goals. We have a great video on how to do that. We have a teacher from middle school in Charleston who talks about how to write goals. So if you're wanting to know more about how to write that goal, that would be there. I do have a couple of guiding questions for you. And just you can go back and look at these. But first of all, things you've got to ask is, do they need functional goals to support their having meaningful access and being able to progress in the standards? Are they able to participate in the grade level general curriculum with meaningful benefit? That doesn't mean they have to be getting it all, because remember, regular ed kids aren't either. But they have to have some benefit. If they're significantly below grade level, does the goal address that targeted prerequisite skill? It might be math, it might be writing. And does the goal have an ambitious rate of improvement that is going to narrow the gap? They got to do better. They got to be on the quick, as I say, the quick game. And so we got to talk about what's really important, which means we can't do everything. Ginger, I know you're going to get into talking about that. I want to talk about the elephant in the room for our teachers, because teachers can't do those best practices unless we have effective scheduling. It will not happen. Shame on us for the years that we have said, okay, you've got all fourth graders at this time. You're the resource teacher. Because those students, all students with disabilities are not the same. And so we have to talk about effective scheduling. We've got a guidance document that we worked on to kind of help school teams think about effective scheduling. And here's some things to think about as you are looking at how you're meeting the skills, the needs of students. And I firmly believe school teams can be very creative in figuring out instructional grouping. I will tell you, and y'all know I'm old, but I was fortunate that 25 years ago, my principal, we scheduled before anybody else, and we had instructional groups. And we had these groups outlined like this, so that I had students, I was still teaching them targeted skills. I had students that I was supporting in the general curriculum. But we grouped and we were service providers. So take a look at this at this scheduling document, because I think we have to be creative to do that. and to serve kids and really start moving them forward. So this is my last one that I'm going to turn over to the master. But here's the thing. Progress in the general curriculum is about mastery of those essential skills. Exposing kids to all the standards, thinking and all the indicators sometimes leaves them in mystery. It's always mastery over mystery. And how do we start thinking about prioritizing those skills? And that's where Ginger's going to take it away and talk to you about some things that we can do that work well with the general curriculum.
Well, thank you, Susan. I always love listening to you share information, and it just blends so nicely with where I'm heading, and I hope I can put a bow on it and tie it up together. But when we talk about prioritizing standards, it's not about saying that some standards don't matter. It's just about identifying which skills are the most essential for student success, because every standard has value. So what I love about this slide is that determining where we're going to put our instructional efforts by prioritizing the standards using the real criteria. So there's an article, I think, in the resources that we're providing to participants today by Manny and Horrell that talks about the real criteria. And, there's the acronym. R stands for is the student ready for the next level? Does this skill prepare students for success in the next unit, the next grade level, or even the next course? For that matter, we're prioritizing readiness to make sure that they won't face challenges as the curriculum progresses. The E stands for endurance. Is that standard going to be meaningful beyond the current grade level? And is it going to have meaningful impact on daily living? Just like, math and problem solving, they're across all content areas as we move through school, making sure that these lifelong skills are things that students need. The assessment stands for A. And it's, will the standard be assessed? And we know that the standards that we're talking about are assessed on the SC Ready test that was given in the spring. And I'm going to talk briefly in a minute about the SC Ready assessment testing blueprint. That's truly a helpful tool when making decisions about standards and prioritizing them. And then the last is leverage. Does the standard have impact learning that's in that content area and across additional content areas? What I love about this article is when you read it, the one quote that rings out to me is that if everything is a priority, then nothing's a priority, because you can't do everything. So figuring out what the child needs and targeting that, and then trying to scaffold those skills as you go through to help them, like Susan said, have growth. One of the things that we use is thinking about task analysis as a key to prioritizing and scaffolding skills. So I'm going to talk about that briefly in just a little while at the end. But by using that real criteria, teams can work together to make true, intentional, data-driven decisions where students are going to have the biggest impact for their learning. So the next slide specifically, and I know we've seen this a good bit, but I do think this is a powerful graphic that we've grown to know. A lot of us are taking LETRS course right now, or finished our LETRS courses through the state. But, Scarborough's reading rope, it's just that visual model to understand how that skilled reading develops. So, I always think about it and I explain it to parents like braiding hair or twisting ropes together. One strand's about figuring out what the words are, and the other is about figuring out and understanding the story. And when you put those together, you increase your strategic and you have that build that automaticity to where a student gains skilled reading skills. And obviously, if you just know one part of the rope and you don't know the other, or you have skills and deficiencies along the way, that's a great place for teachers to work to plan targeted instruction and interventions along the way to help them build those skills and gain skilled reading skills.
And Ginger, I think one thing too that we wanted to point out is that sometimes you're using something like a reading fluency measure, or you're using a maze measure. And a lot of people go, oh, well, that's not fluency. Remember, the fluency is the outcome, that if kids can do all these skills, it's, research has shown over and over again that it supports that fluency will improve as those skills improve. The same way Maze talks about how they can navigate grade level text. And so while you're not necessarily setting a goal with every one of those things, you might have a goal, but you might be using general outcome measures. And that's why those work. And we did one for math too.
That's right. You know, the math standards are new this year and they're operational. So the math rope is very similar to that reading and writing rope, that the blend of concepts, procedures, strategies, and reasoning, as well as disposition, helps to build a very proficient mathematician in the classroom. So teachers are working hard with their high quality instructional materials to use at their fingertips in their classrooms. What I like Susan mentioned, is that a lot of the HQIMs that we adopted have different level type resources for interventions for students above or below grade level to help target skills to help them build their capacity. So I mentioned a second ago about the testing blueprint. This is hyperlinked here. The State Department put out this testing blueprint last year that basically shares information. It's a roadmap to tell us, educators and parents, how students are going to be assessed during state testing. It sets the tone for what we should be doing in our classrooms and lets us know that, you know, these standards are going to be assessed, and it helps us also to target and hone in on which reporting category is going to be assessed, as well as possible the number of items for each reporting category that are going to be found. So it also is a planning tool that teachers can use to build instructional units and help to focus their work with their students. Susan, if you go to the next slide. I snipped a section of the testing blueprint for SC Ready for grades 3 through 5. And today, as I go through the rest of the presentation that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to specifically talk about standard AOR 1.1 for applications of reading. So this is just the reading session portion of the testing blueprint. You can see that the reporting categories are reading literary text, informational text, and then reading vocabulary across the genres. And those are all the standards. But on the right side, you can see the number of items per reporting category. So AOR 1.1, 1.2 on down to 6.1, you know, there's about 6 to 12 items that are in that category that could be on the SC Ready assessment. So we know that these standards are our foundations, and that and I know, like Susan said a second ago, you know, when they were written, we wrote, the standards were written to be accessible to all students. And when you say all students, you've got to make sure that you're doing what you can to help the children find where they are and then help them grow. So I've snipped the next piece from the AOR 1.1, the standards. Susan, if you go to the next slide. So this is, I'm going to look at grade 3 and grade 6. So the standard for grade 3 is the same as the standard for grade 6. What's going to change are the indicators. So the standard is evaluate and critique key literary elements that enhance and deepen meaning within and across text. So for a third grader, that's pretty lofty. A third grader has to do that. And in order to do that, in order to be proficient in this standard, they have to do these two indicators. One, explain how one or more characters develop throughout the plot. Or 1.2, identify and explain the purpose of forms of figurative language to include metaphor, hyperbole, and idioms. And then what I love about our standards that our Office of Assessment and Standards provided for us were these indicator insights that go with the standards. And they provide additional clarity to help a teacher understand, okay, what exactly is this insight asking or telling us that they want us to do with our students? Now, Susan mentioned that a while ago that back in the day when we first started teaching, we may not have had high quality instructional materials. I hate to even tell you that, you know, 35 years ago, I think the first thing I was handed when I went into a classroom was the word list, okay? I don't remember having a textbook. And I have to tell those children all the time when I see them, I hope you turned out all right, because I really worked hard. And, you know, to see that they became successful over time, it wasn't because of a textbook, but it was because I was trying so desperately to figure out what they needed based upon where they were. So we are blessed now that we have these high quality instructional materials, that we don't just have a word list. So what I was talking about, the word list, if you think about, I remember when I taught that first year, I drilled it into my students when they were taking the BSAP. What is a metaphor? What is a hyperbole? What is an idiom? And because those questions were just going to be basic questions on the assessment, gone are the days that that's the case. So the next slide is what I call the secret sauce, okay? So the State Department provided the assessment specifications last year, and I absolutely love this guidance document. It takes the assessment, that takes the standard, which I just mentioned a second ago about being AO1 1.1, about explaining how or one or more characters develop throughout the plot. But what it does is it tells a teacher, in order for you to help a child better grasp the standard, these are the types of text that he or she needs to be familiar with. So literary fiction, historical fiction, science fiction, fantasy, folk tales. And if you think about what you're using in your gen ed classes right now, or even in your special ed classes, being able to expose children to those different types of texts and those different types of genre is going to help students understand when they see a tall tale or when they see a poem or a drama, these are the types of structures that help a reader understand what he or she is reading. The other thing I love about this document is it takes the academic vocabulary that you should help your student understand, and it tells you these are the key academic vocabulary components that you need to make sure your children are familiar with. They link directly back to the glossary and the standards. So it's not like you've got to go out and try to figure out what the definition is. They've told us what the definition is and what you should be teaching to your students, so that as you go from grade level to grade level, that definition doesn't change. And then what I love about this the most is the evidence statements. These to me are the success criteria. If a student can explain how one character develops throughout the plot or how more than one character develops throughout the plot, those are the things that children need to know to tackle that standard, to make sure they're mastering it, okay? Now, Susan, if you'll flip over, let's look at sixth grade real quick. Sixth grade's the same way. What we did in sixth grade, we got the same standard, but the indicators are different. We went from talking about how characters change to talk about how specific events and descriptive details develop the plot, okay, and reveal aspects of characters, and then how figurative language impacts mood, tone, and feeling. And then you have indicator insights there. Flip to the next one. Now, the assessment specifications for grade 6 obviously have ramped up the rigor because we're in sixth grade now. So same text types. So if a student's in third grade and they've read Tall Tales in third grade and they read them in fourth grade and they read them in fifth grade, they might even see them again in sixth grade, okay? Your academic vocabulary is there, and then your evidence statements are there. Again, to me, those are your success criteria. And it just helps to ramp up the rigor as you go grade level to grade level. Now, the next page, the next slide, what we did in Kershaw County last year, our reading coaches got together and they took the assessment specifications, which, like I said, are amazing, and they culled them down and looked specifically at questioning to help teachers have questions on the ready. So when they're teaching the standard or they're working in small groups with students, and these questions are applicable to all grades, make sure you go over this academic vocabulary, but these are some plot development questions and some character development questions that you can use in your small groups or when you're working with students or where you're helping children try to embellish their writing and work with your writing with the text. So these are just the pieces and parts that we put together to help teachers as they use a teaching tool using this specific assessment specification by grade level. Now, the last slide that I have before I have is this. And if you haven't seen the vertical progression of spiral standards, this is when Susan was talking a minute ago about grouping students. You can look at this vertical progression because we were talking about AOR 1.1, and you can do this with any of the standards. I just chose this one for literary text. But if you have a student who has, and I pulled this out a second ago because this is her slide that she had the groupings. So if you have a student who have the prerequisite skills and can meet standards with special education support, they may be on that third grade level, okay? Or they may be on that second grade level. But if you have students who are 2 or 3 grade levels below, reading at a kindergarten level, you can see your entry point that you need to go in to provide support for them. So a kindergarten student, they start off the bat talking about main characters, setting, events, and plot. By the time they get to third grade, they've got to put all those pieces together from kindergarten through second to get to third grade to do the things that we were talking about a second ago when we analyzed that standard. So this vertical progression document is so important because you can see where a student is supposed to be But if you realize as you look at your diagnostic data and any of your teacher-made assessments, as well as your SC Ready data, anything that you have that you're using, you can see where students are missing the mark, and you can find where you can teach into by looking at this vertical progression document to see what skills, prerequisite skills specifically they need. The bolded content is new to a grade level. If it's not bolded, that means that you're just basically still working to build and embellish upon before they get to the next grade level. So if you see, third grade doesn't really add new bolded content, and neither does fifth. But what you're doing is you're still just building that rigor and that automaticity and skill development as you go through the grade levels to get ready for the next one.
And Ginger, I just want to add in here, you may have some students that are really developmentally that with the skills and the vocabulary they have, they might be in sixth grade, but they're really working on maybe those second grade level skills. You could have a sixth grader whose reading, decoding skills are on second grade level, but their understanding is at a higher level. And that's where we have to start really grouping students and figuring out how we're going to serve them. That gets into those supplementary services and things. But the other thing to remember is this is the kind of information that goes in your present level of performance in a diagnostic way to show this is your evidence that you are addressing the grade level standards and that kids are progressing on those. And so it's not just the goal, it is also your diagnostic data and what you're using in your present level. Remember, we use multiple sources of data. Diagnostics are really important there. So I just want to add that in, and I think this is a great way to help people organize that.
Well, I put the page number at the bottom of because the document itself, all the standards are there, but I did put the page number at the bottom so you can go straight to the appendix at the back to find the vertical progression. So, and then I mentioned briefly about task analysis. So helping students to tackle this standard for literary text, but using some sample learning progressions or just scaffolded tasks. I just mentioned, identifying character traits where you read a short passage and just name one thing that character does and what it tells us about them. We do that in 4K right now. I watch teachers on the daily read aloud and then ask about a character and then tell me something a character does and what does that tell about him or her. Sequence changes, chart a character's feelings from the beginning, middle, and ending of a story. How does that character change? Sometimes they don't change. Sometimes they do. If they change, they may learn a lesson. Link events to the change. This part made the character braver because why? And then we don't necessarily do text-dependent analysis anymore because our trend is text-dependent writing, but you still need to push the students back into the text to find how did you find that? How did you feel that way? What did the author say? So quote a line or action. So on page whatever, this shows what by using direct evidence. And then last but not least, I just mentioned, just explain overall development. Writers say the character starts shy but becomes confident when, and you can just help the students use this by just having sentence prompts to help them along the way, to help them build that capacity for learning how to write about these changes as a character. I will say, these documents, I use them on the daily. Our Office of Assessment and Standards at the State Department, they've done a tremendous job with providing some professional learning modules as well as newsletters. And in tandem with the great work that Academic Alliance is doing with resources they're providing. So I think that, we've been very blessed this past year, looking at these great documents that the State Department's provided. So I'm glad that I was able to come today, and I hope you got one little morsel of information that you can take back and use this week with your students. Susan, one of the things that you said a minute ago that sticks out to me that I've circled in the presentation as we've talked is, making sure that no matter what we do, that we individualize that support using database decisions, using the MTSS problem solving model, and critical thinking skills within the general curriculum, and helping those gen ed teachers help you as special ed teachers help our students get to where they need to be. So we've got to work together as a team.
Absolutely. And remembering, I just want to go back and remind everyone that the goals are those big outcome measures. That is not everything we teach. Mm-mm. We have to teach all those parts so that outcome measure will improve. And so that's the importance of those goals. And so I will encourage you to take a look at our tools that we have for writing goals. The one that has been provided for, particularly there's a document provided by the National Center for Intensive Intervention, which I think is fabulous. But I think if we can get down to what are those skills that we are teaching, we don't have to have a goal. Thank goodness we don't have to have a goal for every skill we teach. We're doing a general outcome measure. And so, and we will continue to try to support these things. We do have an evaluation. If you would take a moment, part of one of the questions, and when you fill out the evaluation, by the way, you will get a return email with the certificate. And also part of the evaluation, and I don't know, Deanna, if you can drop that link in the chat too for people that would rather do it that way.
Yep, it's there.
Okay, thanks. I can't see the chat, so good. That's awesome. But also, there's a place for you to put things that you want information on. We want to serve you. We are here to serve you. So please make sure that you take a moment. If there's something else you go, gosh, I wish you had done something on this, or this would help us, we would love to have it. And a couple of other things. We do have everything, a lot of resources on our website on evidence-based instructional practices that support our high-quality instructional materials that, you know, we have now. And so be sure to check those out. If you're looking for something, you can go there on this page. You can go to our Academic Alliance website. We've got lots of materials.